Good morning, everybody. I'm going to actually walk up on stage. To add a little bit of zest to the proceedings this morning, we've got 5 chairs on wheels on a very small stage, so stay tuned because anything could happen. I'm going to start by sitting down anyway. Yeah, just to set the scene before I invite my guests onto the stage. If you think you're working hard, give yourself a bit of slack because you really are. I don't know if you saw the reports this week, but UAE is now the 3rd hardest working country in the world. I refuse to believe that Malta and Bhutan are actually working harder than we are. And I'm also slightly worried that employees are going to look at that and go, 3rd, we can do better than that. But that very much backs up, I don't know if you saw the Cigna research, the Wellbeing 360 report they do every year, but they also found that 98% of respondents in the UAE are suffering from at least one symptom of burnout. So if you think you're working hard, you are. Now, as parents, not only are you having to cope with all of that, but now our children are entering into a really complicated landscape. Katie and I were talking just before we came on stage. I don't know if you've seen it, there's a really powerful new campaign by Dove, which is all about self-esteem, particularly for girls. It's really, really powerful. It cut me up inside. One of the findings it came back with was that 50% of our kids are impacted, their mental health is impacted by social media. 80% of the children that Dove talked to said that they were addicted to social media. And 80% of the experts that they spoke to said that it's harming their children's mental health. Flip side, if you look at the US as well, we've now got multiple school boards who are suing the social media giants for impacting and harming our children's mental health. So within all of that, you're working harder than you ever have done, and you've got to safeguard your children from pressures that never existed when we grew up. So, when I grew up, the bedroom used to be one of the safest places for children to escape from bullying, to escape from pressures from outside. Now it can be one of the most dangerous. So with that really optimistic view, I'd like to invite my panelists to the stage. Please give them a round of applause. We're going to play Pass the Parcel with the microphones as well, which should also heighten the danger level for our panelists. Joanne, you're a mindfulness expert, so I want you to be mindful that you're on the edge. And I've seen you moving around down here. You move, so just try and restrain. Rather than me read out the panel above, and by the way, my 7-year-old had a nightmare about 4 a.m. this morning, so I'm sorry, I couldn't be bothered with the bow tie. But I'm going to let my panelists introduce themselves. And I'll start with you, Naomi.
Good morning, I'm Naomi Williams. I work at Southview School in Renram community. I'm the deputy head of the primary school, and I am in charge of the pastoral care of the children there. I will be speaking today mostly about primary aged children, so if you have children of that age, then I'm your go-to person. I have 2 daughters, a 15-year-old and a 12-year-old, so I've navigated that early stage and I'm now in the throes of the wonderful teenage phase. They are gorgeous, but my gosh, they're challenging, aren't they? I'm very much looking forward to being here. Thank you for inviting me, and I will pass on to Rob.
Thank you very much. Good morning all, my name is Rob Stewart. I am a business psychologist. I have been in Dubai for about 7 months or so now, so still new, still finding my feet. I work in leadership development in business psychology, but I have a previous background in counselling psychology as well, so I thought it really useful to bring some of that into today's discussion. I also have two children, a lot younger, definitely not in the teenage years yet, 2.5 and 4.5, but both of those are still in the UK, and I'm trying to get them out here with my ex at the moment, so that's interesting, but I know all about parental guilt. Really happy to be here today and to talk about what organisations can do to really consider parenting, parents and working parents and what they need in the workplace. So thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Kate Hill. I'm at the other end of the school spectrum. I'm the head of middle school at Dubai College, so that's year 10 and year 11. And I've been here for, I think, a lot longer than most of the people on the panel. I also have 2 children. My oldest is in her first year at university and my son is in year 12. So I've got to sort of the upper end of the child rearing.
Hello again. So I started my expat journey in 1981. Yes, I'm that old. and have been an expat on and off since then. We spent almost 13 years in Dubai, and I left in 2020 and come back regularly to visit. I have left a part of myself. He's going to hate me for doing this. I'm a mum of 3, and my eldest son is sitting just there. So 28, 26, and 22. So good luck, is all I'm going to say. I was a school counsellor in the UK and then here for just over 10 years. And during that time, what I discovered was that parents play such a vital role in, the well-being, emotional and educational of their children. And so a lot of the work I did in school was with parents. And I set up parenting groups and did lots of teaching and supporting, and then eventually left working in schools for a whole host of reasons that I'm sure my 2 colleagues here probably would fully understand, but I'm not going to share, and went into private practice, which is what I still do now, and work with clients, predominantly expats all over the world. It's pretty much the same wherever you live, right? It doesn't make a lot of difference. So, yeah, I'm a mindfulness teacher and work as a therapist with individuals, parents, and couples as well. So if you need any couples therapy, you can also ask me about that
Leave
afterwards.
the sales pitch till later. no, thank you. And thank you to all the panellists. Before we get going, I suppose I should say something about Mentl as well. Mentl is a platform where we aim to tackle the stigma of mental health in the community, in the workplace. We often try to talk to employees as well about the ROI of mental health and looking after and providing that kind of holistic environment where everyone can thrive. We try to get them in the head, if not in the heart, because basically companies that embrace this are more profitable. I am a father of 3. I've been an expat for about 14 years now. This room is a very psychologically safe room. So if you have questions, we're going to talk for a while, but I will do audience participation and ask if anyone has questions. Please, I don't want to wait till the end of the panel for you to then try and remember that you get a question about something that the panelists said 30 minutes ago. So if you do have questions, please, we've got 2 educationalists on the panel, so if it's not too triggering, you can even put your hand up. But that, in my case, might trigger some bad memories. Anyway, Naomi, I want to start with you because primary school, you're from primary school. Now, often we might think about mental health of our children and it might be from the teenager. We all remember perhaps or some of us will remember the Kevin and Perry sketch about as soon as they're a teenager, things are woo. However, you're at primary school end. What are you seeing in terms of the mental health of our children and the impact on them of the outside pressures?
Thank you. I've worked in primary and prep schools for over 20 years now, and I think most recently I've seen a significant shift in what we need to focus on in a primary school. So, for example, 15 years ago perhaps we would be preparing children to be able to move from one classroom to another sensibly by the time they get to year 7. That would be one of our main focuses in a primary school. But now, it's very much about children being able to self-regulate, being much more self-aware, and being able to manage their thoughts, their feelings, their emotions, and their behaviours. A lot of this is driven by what they see and how they interact with each other, because we've seen a huge shift in how children really do interact. There's lots more, obviously, online interactions and far fewer social interactions. So we do find that children now in the primary school are missing out on vital social cues that they used to have when 15 years ago. What we're doing at Southview, where I'm a deputy, is implementing a program right from the nursery children, so that by the time, the aim is that by the time they get to year 6, they will have learnt a little bit more about self-regulation. We use a concept called zones of regulation. Some of you may well be familiar with it, and it's a fantastic tool for parents as well. One of the things that we're implementing in September is the ability for parents to be trained in the use of zones of regulation. And what we're doing is really trying to get children to, as Joanne said earlier, recognise the feelings and the physical sensations that children get before their behaviours. I've spent a lot of time this week reacting to a situation in year 6 that I've never ever experienced before. I won't go into the details of it, but I've implemented some workshops this week as a reaction to it, to try and encourage these gorgeous little children, they are only 11, in an ability to be able, rather have an ability to recognise the feelings they get, reappraise the thoughts that they have initially, and learn really how to self-soothe themselves. So we've been deploying different sorts of strategies. But it's an absolute minefield, I think, now in primary, but as long as schools have got good strategies in place, we will be okay.
Thank you. I mean, it's interesting you talking about things like self-regulation and being in touch with your feelings. I mean, how many of us in this room could actually honestly say that we self-regulate well or are indeed in touch with our feelings? Joanne, I'm going to throw the microphone, if you don't mind passing it back down to you. I mean, I find that fascinating, if not slightly scary as a parent, that already at 10, 11 years old, you know, the mental health impacts of the world around are beginning to show. As a parenting coach and as a parenting counsellor, what are the kind of common concerns you're hearing from parents about their children's well-being? And how much do the parents have, not control, but the ability to influence that? What can they do?
I think the word that comes to mind is anxiety, I would say. I probably hear that word more every day than any other word. And it's used to describe a whole host of feelings and behaviours. And I agree with Naomi, you know, seeing the shift in what our children are being expected to cope with every day, it's got much bigger. And I think that's why there's now more expectation on parents as well. The more our children are expected to cope with, the more we're expected to cope with. And it's everybody's looking for a solution, right? We're all like, can somebody just help me? Because this is really hard and I feel overwhelmed. I think, you know, whenever I hear that word self-regulation applied to a child, one of my concerns is that no matter how hard we work, how hard we try, a child is never going to be able to consistently self-regulate, right? They just don't have the capacity to be able to do that. So I think I'm so happy that you're bringing those things in, and particularly that you're teaching them to parents. I think we also have to remember that the skills that we're talking about when we talk about self-regulation are things that even as adults that we struggle with. And what's interesting is that human beings are a mammal who still co-regulates even in our adult form. So we require co-regulation. It's one of the reasons why we suffered so much in the pandemic, because we couldn't co-regulate in person other than with the people who were right next to us, who were often the ones that were triggering me. Right?
I'm not sure what Kate.
Sorry, Kate. So you're the one that's annoying me, and I also need you to co-regulate with me. What am I meant to do? So, you know, I think whenever we talk about self-regulation, we also must talk about co-regulation and what that means in practice. And understanding as an adult, I think this is the biggest pressure from having children. I struggle. I wouldn't have had those words because I never taught them at school. I recognise as an adult when I had my first child, sorry, Connor, I didn't know how to self-regulate. I could numb, I could distract, I could avoid, could do all of those things. I pretty much didn't know how to self-regulate. And now I've got this little person who needs me to co-regulate with them. It's no wonder parenting is so stressful, right? So I think what's happening here is this shift into more, I think we have to be so careful we don't put the onus onto children to be able to self-regulate at all times. For sure, we can teach them really helpful skills that they will take into adulthood. And we need to remember that most of the time they're not going to be able to use them when they need them the most. So therefore, parents and teachers, sadly, and I hate putting more of a burden on teachers because I think they're already pretty overburdened, parents and teachers and any other adult is also going to have to know how to co-regulate, which means we also have to learn how to self-regulate. It's like an ever-ending cycle, isn't it?
I'm really resisting the urge to get your little one on stage and just do a Jerry Springer style. Sorry.
He'll never
It's psychologically a safe space for everyone but you. Co-regulation though, I mean, you talk about it. Why don't you just explain what co-regulation is, just in case there's anyone in the room or who watches this recording isn't quite familiar with the term?
Okay. How quickly do you want
You've got
to
to
do
tweet
it?
it.
I've got to tweet it. I don't use Twitter. I've got to tweet it. I just have to say the word nervous system. That's actually 2 words, right? So when we're talking about regulation, we're talking about our nervous systems. We're talking about our bodies. We all have them. We're all sitting in this room as our nervous systems. So what we're looking to do is I need my nervous system to be calm enough so that when I come into contact with your nervous system, it recognises there's another calm nervous system, so there's nothing scary about to happen and I don't need to react. We so focus on words, but actually it's not really words that are that important. It's not the word I use. Is my nervous system sending out a message that this is safe, that we're in a safe place? Because if it is, it doesn't really matter what I say. And this is something I really struggle to communicate well to parents. Please don't worry about learning a script. Are you calm enough? Is your nervous system regulated enough that it's sending out messages, this place is safe, so that your nervous system picks up on that and it calms down? So it's a really good point. When we talk about co-regulation, what we're really talking about is my nervous system is talking to your nervous system and telling you, you do not need to panic, right? This is safe and I'm here. And as long as my nervous system is here and it's also in a regulated state, yours will. It may not come down immediately, but it will gradually come into that safe place as well.
I think it's time we allow Kate's nervous system to respond. I mean, you've been co-regulating Joanne all morning and you didn't even know it.
No.
You also are at the slightly older spectrum that Naomi was talking about as well. So I think over the past 3 years, we talk about the modern pressures, but those modern pressures can be coronavirus, the pandemic, increase in social media addiction. What are you seeing, and what tactics are you putting in place, through your school to help them deal with this?
Well, I think some of the tactics that we're using are actually ones that have been around a very long time. So the idea of students being in a tutor group with a tutor who should know them well. In our school, we try to have the same tutor from year 7 to year 11. Now, obviously, it's not always practical. People leave and so on, and then they move to a different tutor for the sixth form. So, we recognise, obviously, that all students have different experiences at home. We're bringing them into an environment and we want them to get on, and we want them to have somebody that they can go and talk to. And in the secondary environment, they're going to different lessons all the time with different teachers. And that form tutor is sort of the linchpin, really, the person that they can come back to at the beginning of the day, the middle of the day, the end of the day, and they can converse with that person. Now, it doesn't always work out for every individual, but that's sort of the overall aim. We also have our counselling department as well, so we have now student services where we have several learning support teachers plus several counsellors, and students are at liberty to make their own appointments. Parents can make appointments for them, and that is also kind of interwoven in our school fabric, so students can feel supported for that. We do a lot of positive reinforcement. We have a pastoral program which comprises now 4 blocks of lessons, which are 8 lessons each, where we go all the way through the school from year 7 all the way to year 13. In year 7, it might be a lesson on how to be kind, how to be a friend, how to promote yourself, how to like yourself. We move up, we go through all the kind of sexual relationship stuff as we get through year 11, sixth form, and then also moving on to how you can cope at university for the older students. So we've only actually really launched that in the last couple of years. So we're just actually at the moment in the beginning of block 4 of the entire run through. So that is one way that we're trying to address the pressures on our students, because what really we are trying to do is make things as positive as possible. Now, on the other side, we also have put in a ban on phones, so students are no longer allowed to have their phone out during the school day. That's pretty difficult to police, and obviously they can go off to the bathroom and make a call or go on their social media, but that is what we're aiming to do to try and avoid students sitting around in break and lunchtime scrolling through social media. And on the other side of that coin, we have a very extensive extracurricular program which works at lunch breaks and after school. So the idea is to encourage students to participate in something rather than sitting in a room on their phone. And we do actually register with that, and if there are students who aren't participating, again, we will try and encourage them via their form tutor to do something in that free time that they have at break and at lunchtime. So the majority of the things we're doing are positive, to try and encourage more social interaction between children. But on the other side, of course, there are always going to be students who are struggling. And as the pastoral team, as the form tutors, the head of years, the counsellors, we would always encourage students to come and speak to us if there's anything bothering them. And it's a very difficult thing for parents. Sometimes you think, no, school can't do anything, I don't want anybody to know what's going on with my child's scared. And we actually even have an anonymous platform that they can report something if they want to. And that sometimes also opens the door as well, because we would never go out and broadcast an issue kind of publicly. It's about a conversation with those students, and we do find sometimes at the end of a year we'll find that a student has been suffering. Every school has problems, and we would all be naive, I think, if we said that there were never any unhappy people in our school. Of course, there are going to be in every organisation, and our job is to try and find those students and minimise that situation for them and help them to deal with whatever it is that they're coping with. So yeah, I would say on the one hand, we have a whole load of strategies in place to encourage students to make friends, to get out of life as much as they can. And on the other hand, we have a support system for those who are finding that difficult.
Thank you. Just to put the focus back onto working parents, we talk about working parents feeling guilt. I think sometimes, often we're made to feel guilty. If we think about some of the workplaces that we work in, obviously none of the workplaces that are represented here today, but working parents are made to feel guilty. They're expected to put their families second. We got to this point, and I don't know when it was, that work is actually more important than our own health, our own mental health, and our children and our families. So I'm going to bring it to you, Rob. You've been very Zen-like, at least on the exterior, waiting patiently. You're a business psychologist. You work with employers. If we talk about leaders, how do they create cultures of respect within their organisations that tailored to the unique needs of working parents. Because often working parents, I mean, I think we're 40 to 60% of any workforce, and we're often the more experienced managers or deliverers of productivity within organisations. So we are important.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I think one of the first things, I think 3 important points I'll touch on. The first one is organisations and leaders need to take it seriously, and I think that's lacking. Just for a bit of context, currently we're about to see the biggest population shift of demographics that we've seen in the workplace for the last 80 years. We've got a huge boomer population and they're about to leave the workplace. So it's like, okay, they leave the workplace, who's taking over? Well, it's the millennials. It's Gen X, they've already got kids, it's millennials, they have younger kids, and then Gen Z, who may not have kids at all, who knows, let's see. But what it will leave us with is a war on talent. There will be, if you already find there's a war for talent, there'll be a bigger war for talent. We simply don't have the numbers. Now, places like the Gulf are going to manage to navigate this slightly better because of the populations. But when you look at Western Europe, you look at China, you look at Korea, Japan, they are going to massively struggle with populations. So straight away, you're going, regardless of the ethical and moral case of I want to take care of my people, one of the things that we have to consider is we are going to have to do whatever we can to attract talent and keep and retain that talent. So if a huge number of people are coming in and they have children, that is a priority for them. We have to look after them. So one of the first things is absolutely take it seriously as leaders. The second thing I'd say is listen. It's great when I work with organisations and they go, oh, yeah, we've got flexible working, and I go, okay, fantastic. But I mean, out of interest, folks, can I just get a show of hands who are parents in the room? Yeah, so quite a lot of us, great. And can I just ask, as a parent, and you may be in different stages of parenting, but has your employer, regardless of whether they've offered flexible working and stuff, could I just get a show of hands if they've ever turned around to you and gone, what do you need? No. 1. Okay, good, 2. All right, fantastic. So here's the thing. We all know from being parents that it's a very different experience than other people have had. Yeah, we share a few similarities here and there, but a lot of the time, we've got children of different ages, they go to different schools at different times. We've got all sorts of differences regarding their mental health, regarding neurodivergence. Like, that experience is different for everyone. And one of the things organisations are good at doing is going, oh, this is a tick box exercise. So let's just give flexible working. Great, there it is, it's done. And one of the things I think we need to do is go, parents are individuals and they have individual needs. We need to talk to them, we need to find out what they need. That's the start of it. And I think the final thing, which is really key, is then implementing things. And this picks up on your first point. Implementing things, but implementing them fairly. You've got 3 kids and you say to your employer, I know you're self-employed. If you said to your employer, I need time off to go and pick up my kids, okay, yeah, you can leave at 2 o'clock, no problem at all. Oh, thanks, great, off I go, pick up my kids. And then in the next few months I notice, oh, I'm not on that project. Why am I not on that project? Or it gets to the end of the year and it's like, oh, I seem to be not getting the same rating as my colleagues. Like, what's happening here? Now your manager won't turn around and go, well, you're not here. And they are. So you're being judged harsher. But those biases creep in. So it's all very well if we then offer these flexible working initiatives and other initiatives to our parents. But if we are not really supporting them at a cultural level and making sure that they're implemented without bias, then we're punishing people for having children. And it'll just get to the point where either people don't use those initiatives, or they do use those initiatives, but there's an underlying resentment that will result in presenteeism. That presenteeism will then lead to attrition in the end. And I just see a lot of parents who really struggle to, even though they have the offer to leave work to pick up their kids, I don't want to.
It still is that competition to remain at your desk and not to access it. Yeah. I have to say my boss is always giving me low scores in my appraisals, but I'm my own boss, so that's an issue for therapy. I'm just going to do a quick pause to ask if anyone in the audience does have questions. We're not going to throw board rubbers, so feel safe to ask a question. Hand straight up. Great, hand straight up. We'll start with the table in front. Yes?
Yeah, no, just touching on, I think that whole, building up with resentment and stuff as a parent. I am self-employed and I've got flexibility, which is great. The office is my car half the time, wherever my daughter's at an after-school activity. But I know when I was trying to get back into the workplace after maternity leave, especially in this country, you just hit with so many barriers straight away because you're a parent. And I think the recruiter that had got me my first job in this region, his first question was like, no one's going to employ you because they'll be wondering when you're off to have your second baby, you don't have a nanny, you know, you're just basically unemployable, and that's like straight back just because I'm a parent. So I don't know, as a male in the workplace, I do feel, I don't know, my experience, like a lot falls to the female, and that just adds on the pressure. But it'd be great to like hear from a male perspective as well, because I think it's all about the female, but then actually there is a lot of pressure on the guys as well. And you know, I think if you could take your children to the after-school activities, it doesn't just naturally fall to the mother. It'd be good to kind of get your thoughts on that and what your experience is.
I'm fortunate, and I guess Rob might be in the same place. You know, I actually spent 33 years on the corporate treadmill before I launched this business last year. And my kids were one of my whys. So now I do get to lean in and spend some time and be there for those sorts of things. I remember, you know, if you think guys working 9 to 5, you might see your daughter or your son for an hour in the morning, and if you're lucky, an hour at night. I actually quit an employer who, I still can't believe I said this, but I said, I will work for you 22 hours a day. I just need that hour in the morning when I get my daughter up, and I need that hour at night where I put my daughter to bed and read her the bedtime story, because that's super important to me. And they said, don't let your personal life get in the way of your job. So I quit, which is the best decision I ever made. But Rob, I'll get your perspective on that, because I think, you know, dads do, you know, men's mental health, and we don't talk about this not nearly enough, but as a working dad, it can be tricky to navigate.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you're absolutely right. Regardless of the world that we live in and what we think is right or should be right, still the majority of that parenting falls to the women in the relationship. Like I say, whether it should or not, it does. I think one thing's really important, which is, you know, women are out there advocating for women's rights in business and pushing for this. We need men to advocate for women's rights as well. We need to be sitting there going, okay, great that you're doing X, Y, and Z, but actually I need to be able to contribute more in that parenting role and help out my partner. So either you need to provide more for women who are in those positions, or provide more for men as well to be able to help with that. I've looked at some of the statistics in the region, and you know, if there is any parental leave given, sort of paternal leave given, it's minimal. I mean, most of the time it's none, but it looks pretty minimal in comparison to what women are offered, which also in the region doesn't look fantastic. So there's definitely more that we can do, yeah, I mean, from my own personal perspective, I want to be, you know, much more involved, and I'm very lucky that I am also self-employed, which does, to a degree, give me some flexibility. But I think more conversations need to happen from men. It's like how we can advocate for both parents and really look at how we can both contribute, because you're right, it does too often fall on the women.
And perhaps if there are, you know, fathers that were listening to this recording after this session, I mean, there's a really good book by Oliver Burkeman, which is called 4,000 Weeks, which is slightly shocking. So the title of it, if you live to 80 years old, you get 4,000 weeks, which is slightly scary, because I can't imagine 80 years, but I can see 4,000 weeks on a calendar. If you're a working dad, just think about those school sports days. You probably get, 14 of those in their life, 10 of those. Those Christmases and those birthdays. Your kids, you've got about 10 or 12 of them, even the family holidays that are meaningful, and then they're gone. So allyship is really, really important, and very, very good for the profitability of companies. But it's also an opportunity for guys to actually spend meaningful time and not miss the lives of their children. You're really keen to ask a question, so please.
Yeah, I mean, just on the last point as well. I mean, as a dad, when my first child was born, in the UK at the time, they just introduced shared parental leave. So I was lucky actually, because I took most of that time. My wife had to go back to work pretty soon, so I was at the outset of 6 months, and I took off 6 months, and you know, ever since, I've never looked back. So even after that, I kind of went self-employed, and then that's it. I'm the main carer at home in that sense. So I get your point, and I see it's only when you're on the other side you experience and you see the difficulties that exist. And even when I went back into work, the response from colleagues and people and the environment, you know, you just have a bit of a nice little holiday, haven't you? And all of that. And so it's, and I guess my question, going back to what we talked about, what we've heard today as well, also is that context is key. Context is key in this, in all of this, and especially around working parents, mental health. You know, go back to therapy. What we experience at home, how we regulate at home, is very different to how we regulate in the workplace. And so, as a behavioural scientist, so some of the work that we focus on is environment. So we talk about individuals, but what about the environment in the workplace? How can we nudge people to, and I guess the question more for Rob as an example, how can we create environments to help parents, help managers, help leaders to automatically, almost kind of change habits, or kind of change behaviour without telling people, you need to do this. How can we change people's behaviour through nudges and so on?
Yeah.
Rob's at the talking stick for a bit, so I'm actually going to ask Naomi, Kate and Joanne to kind of come on that more first, because you obviously you are managers within your own departments. So how do you create those environments, to talk to the gentleman's question? Sorry. Eartha.
So how do we create it for parents and for children?
For your employees as well.
In terms of managing their own mental health and well-being. I think from our perspective in a school, one of the most important factors, and it sounds quite simple, but our school is vast. So in the primary alone, we have maybe 60, 70, 80 members of staff. One of the most important factors there is that every single one of those people has one person to go to. So they have a go-to person, you know, whether it's a line manager or their head of year or whatever. And I think that is the most effective way as a starting point in terms of making sure that everyone, their well-being and their mental health is secure because they have somebody to talk to. I think it's quite different. A school is quite a different sort of workplace than a sort of a corporate environment. But that's not always present in schools, actually. And I think we do very, very well, and actually the principal of my school is sitting right there, so I have to say we do really well. But we do offer allowances and opportunities for people to do things that are contextual to their own situations. So just because we have awesome holidays every year doesn't mean that things don't crop up. And we do make sure that our staff are well cared for in that perspective.
You had to remind me of the holidays.
Can you go into
Joanne, if I may send the microphone down to you, I wanted to get your perspective, because obviously you're working with a lot of parents. Those parents are often leaders as well. So how does that show up in the conversations you have? And how do you help or counsel or advise for those leaders that are facing those pressures, that want to be mothers and fathers as well as, you know, leaders?
Yeah, I mean, work conversations come up a lot, right? And I love the fact you talked about environment. I think environment is incredibly important. I do find it's really interesting when an individual enters into a therapeutic relationship and learns about themselves. They really want to go and share that. They want to take their learning and share it. Now, I'm not saying every business leader should go into therapy for 12 months, right? But what I'm saying is, I think if leaders, the more they learn about themselves, the more they take care of their own well-being and are aware of their environmental factors and how it impacts on them, I think that is the best way they can take that into the work environment, because they've learned it for themselves, and therefore they can share it from a very human perspective. And one of the things I often talk about with people when they are engaging on that journey is, how do you resource yourself, right? What are the resources in your environment that you can use to resource you when you have all these demands placed on you and you are feeling under-resourced? And it's something that people don't really tend to think about. They think about all the energy that goes out, but they're not thinking about, how can I actually bring some energy in to my life? What are the ways I can resource myself? And it's very different for every person. I wonder if all of you sitting in this room can just think, what is one way that I resource myself? Social media is not a resource, by the way, I just want to say that. It can be if you utilise it to learn something, right? But if you're using it as a numbing technique or a distraction, it's probably an energy taker rather than energy giver. So one of the most obvious resources is something that is based in a natural environment, right? So nature is one of the best resources that we can give ourselves. It actually co-regulates with us, and it provides a mix of sensory. So it could be nature, it could be spending time with somebody who gives you energy rather than takes energy from you. It could be listening to music, could be different types of music. It could be smells. I lost my sense of smell and taste from COVID. It still hasn't come back. And I noticed that I really miss that resource. I can no longer use smell as a resource. So it could be, smell could be a particular type of food that you like to eat. It could be anything. I really encourage people I work with, let's make a list of things that resource you. And then whenever you're feeling under-resourced, you can look to those things and say, right, what could I use today? What might be a resource for me today? And some of those things might involve other people, and some of those things might just be me. But it really has to take your environment into consideration. There's no point me saying, well, excellent, that 2 weeks you spent in the Maldives was a great resource, but right now, what are you actually going to do here? And if you can learn that, you can also pass that out. I think it's a very practical way in the workplace to think about, are there resources in this environment right here, like in a school? You talked about having that one go-to person. That's a resource, right? And so I think if you're a business leader, how do your staff resource themselves? How do you role model resourcing yourself, and how can you bring that into your environment?
I just want to underline something you said at the top of when you started speaking as well, because I've had previous employees call me woke and liberal, a bleeding heart liberal. But what's interesting is we're all advocates for mental health and well-being, and we understand the benefits of thriving. There was a piece of research that dropped from McKinsey, which is obviously a very serious management consultancy, just 2 weeks ago, where they talked about the 10 transformational shifts that leaders will need to cope with and take on board to be able to succeed in the landscape moving forward. 6 of them talk to emotional intelligence. I mean, there were things like AI and all that sort of thing in there. One of them was very specifically targeted at leaders as well, saying that leaders need to go on a self-journey because their employees are looking to their employers to set the standard. So as a leader, you will be a better leader and a better performer, and I'm not looking at Naomi's boss when I say this, if you have gone on that journey of self-awareness. And that's not me saying that, that's McKinsey saying that. I want to stay with the room because it's your session anyway. I love the fact we've got so many hands. You were fastest to the trigger there, so if we can send the mic to the back, and perhaps some questions for Kate and then Rob if we can as well.
Thank you. It's just an observation more than anything, but a fascinating topic. Something I found with my clients is that regardless of whether we're talking children, we're actually talking about parents as well. So all the same emotions, all the same culture, all the same kind of environment is applicable in either scenario. But as an observation to corporates and to teaching staff, if you're in an environment where you don't have children, actually you are a child yourself, so you do have a parent, and the same emotions come into play. And what a lot of people don't do is plan for caring for their parents. A lot of people preempt the fact that they are having children or that they've got this journey to go on. But it's just an interesting shift that I think corporates and individuals need to appreciate, that actually, regardless of your personal circumstances, you are likely to come across these emotions and these circumstances as both a parent and a child or a parent as well. So really interesting, and I think it's something that we all need to kind of embrace across the industry, definitely.
Great observation. Before we move on, I'm going to ask Rob or Kate, would you like to respond to that observation?
Very likely.
I love this, by the way. Thank you for doing my job for me.
I'd say it's incredibly important, and there are a number of organisations that now, alongside offering parental leave, are offering elder care as well for exactly that reason. You know, we need to think about having an ageing demographic and how we're going to take care of them. So I think that's incredibly important to do as well. So I just wanted to say that some are taking it seriously, but there's definitely still room for improvement.
And Kate, before I move on to another question, I just want to ask a question, which was, how are you collaborating with parents to address these mental health concerns, both in the children but themselves as well, and with the teachers? How do you bring that, drawing the dots between those conversations?
I think we've become, over the years, more open to parents coming into the school, as opposed to, and trying to work more with parents, as opposed to it being, drop kids off at the school gates and don't see them again. So we do have a lot of events for parents. We have meetings at the beginning of each school year, sort of setting out what's going to happen during that year. And our counselling department have they were doing regular kind of meetings, a bit like this, I guess, with parents, but actually they're now podcasting because they feel that will reach a wider audience. But they do also have events which they invite parents into, and parents can set the agenda to those meetings as well. So if there's something specific they want to talk about. And we are constantly meeting with parents depending on the circumstances of their student, whether it be more of a formal meeting, parents' evening, to discuss their grades, or something more specific to an individual in terms of learning support or a problem that has arisen. So yeah, it is a constant changing environment.
Naomi, I'm going to bring you in before we move on as well. And also, when you're having that conversation, what is the advice or what's the collaboration when we're talking about those pressures created by social media? I mean, we talk about modern pressures, but quite often it can be social media.
Thank you. This is a really interesting topic, actually. I held a workshop a few weeks ago at school about self-esteem and the impact of social media. One of the conversations that we had that went on for quite a while, actually, was stemmed from a parent saying, well, what are you doing about the social media usage of the children in the primary school? And I thought that was a really interesting question. Because what we do in a school is we'll discuss, we'll encourage, or we'll discourage, because I think there has to be both with social media, because it's going to be there forever. We have to educate, we have to advise, we have to mediate, we have to counsel, we have to support. But what we will not do, and we can't do as a school, is direct what your children do on social media. And that's what parents want us to do. And what I was saying to the parent who asked this was, well, take it like a 5-year-old's birthday party. So on a weekend, if two 5-year-olds are on a trampoline and they have an argument, and one of them pushes the other one over on the trampoline, and then the parent comes into school on Monday and says, look, they had a real argument on the trampoline at this birthday party, what are you going to do about it? I was like, well, that's not for us. We can educate and discuss and advise and mediate and counsel and support those two children in terms of how they should interact with each other. But we can't facilitate that kind of, working out what they should and shouldn't be doing at a birthday party. So my response really to parents about social media is you have got to be in charge of your child's social media. Not us as a school. Okay, I don't know if you agree with that and how you do it at Dubai College.
Well, we completely agree. As I say, we do now ban phones in school, but we're very aware that they're still there, and we try and educate students. But yeah, and an awful lot of the issues we have, particularly bullying, happens across that divide between school and home. And we were saying about the safe space of your bedroom. If I was to give one piece of advice to anybody, it would be don't let your kids have their phones in their bedrooms at night. Bedtime is bedtime, because those conversations, those unpleasantnesses go on 24/7, and that is one way that you can protect them and give them that safe time It's certainly something that I do. My 17-year-old still doesn't have a phone in his bedroom at night. So,
are you allowed a phone in your bedroom right now? We had a question here in the middle table. Time is against us as well. I'm waiting for Kate to turn around and say the bell is gone. At which I want to respond, the bell is for me, not for you. Please.
Hi. It was actually just to pick on your point, Scott, earlier, possibly for Robert. We were talking about senior leadership and the fact that leaders and C-level executives are going to have to develop really what is emotional IQ, right? The sad fact remains, whether we like it or not, ladies, C-level executives, the highest proportion still tend to be men. There seems to be a disconnect with leaders in businesses and trying to drive those environments and cultures that we all agree need to be created. But women with husbands in the room, you might agree, sometimes it's hard to get your husband to talk about these things and to address their emotions because it's uncomfortable. So it's more of a comment really for discussion, but how do we go about addressing that?
I'm going to do some shameless self-promotion as well, actually, because at Mental we have actually on June 3rd got a men's mental health retreat, which is a daytime taster session to try and get men to lean into meditation, to Reiki, to sound healing, to fire and ice saunas and ice bath, and to try and educate and open their minds a little bit. So actually this stuff's good for you. You don't have to do all of it, but try and find some tactics. And I think we want the mothers and the wives to actually probably have to push and give permission to their husbands to take a day out and go and do this. It's a difficult conversation, and men, you know, the worrying statistics about us, particularly between 40 to 49, is the suicide rate of men at that age bracket is terrifying, and we're 4 times more likely to complete on an act of suicide than women. With all the pressures and all the accelerating, and we're in this country that's the 3rd hardest working, it really is time for men to wake up to this, because you know the patriarchy really sucks for women, but it's actually a trap for a lot of men as well. So we do need to kind of dismantle this and have a new way of thinking. Rob?
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's not even a choice. It's going to have to be a necessity. Again, if we look back, take a step back, look at the context of where we are with the world of work. We've moved away from primary and secondary, mining, manufacturing. We're in the creative age, which means the greatest asset in this room is every single one of your brains. And we know very clearly from the inclusion neuroscience is when you are in a state of threat, your brain does not work. It's as simple as that. We've got research that shows when people do an IQ test and they are told that no one likes them, they're going to grow old and die by themselves, they score 10 points lower. Like you're 10 points less intelligent when you don't feel like you belong. So what that means is if we need people to be using their brains and be smart, because we're in the creative age, that is going to take bringing in people and bringing all that uniqueness that they bring and valuing it and creating a place where they belong. So we are going to have to, as business leaders, start bringing it in. The tricky thing is bias is pervasive. You said about, yes, there are definitely a predominant, male demographics in sort of senior leader positions. We see across all industries when women move from middle management up to senior management, there's a drop-off. Often going off, having kids and maybe not coming back in, or coming back in but then facing those biases. And that again is going to have to change. We want to try, and business leaders want to try and have the results and the returns that they've always had by doing things that they've always done. That's a status quo bias, and it's just simply not going to be the case. Younger generations are going to come in with different belief systems, with different attitudes and needs, and if we don't give it to them, we won't succeed. It's as simple as that. So the changes are a necessity. It's going to have to be.
And a final point on that as well is that, there's an old phrase which says it's lonely at the top. We talk about leaderships, regardless of gender. We've seen the science now. We have the US Surgeon General just last week come out and say that loneliness is now as physically bad for you as tobacco. We spoke to Dr. Ranga Chatterjee, who said basically, if you feel isolated for any reason, that's as bad for you as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So it really is time for us to open up our minds to this conversation. I'm sorry, the bell has gone. I can feel Katie's bearing into me. please, we're going to be around, we're going to be networking. I'm sure all of my guests today would love to take more questions afterwards. I'd like to say thank you to all of you for being so engaged and your questions. You made my job much easier. And please, a round of applause for my guests and for yourselves.